I don't have a talk prepared per se. What I really want is to engage as many of us as we can and talk about the notion of rights, or our rights, and what we deserve. Some of you saw the newsletter probably, and I made mention of this in the newsletter. And I honestly can't remember if Joko said this to me personally, or if it was in a talk that I was attended, or I read this. Maybe it's in one of her books. I just don't remember. But she made the point that we don't have any rights. And she was, if I recall, it's 30 years ago, but she was a little more strident than that in saying, what gave you that silly idea? That you have a right to one thing or another happening or not happening in the next moment. Where'd that notion come from? What I wrote in the newsletter, I think, was, and my recollection tells me, and my recollection is not always loyal, but that she asked, show me those rights. So I want to have us talk about this a little bit tonight, but and it's really easy, especially with what I'm going to just quickly touch on, to have this get political or civic, and I want to avoid that, because that's not what I want to talk about. We could talk about our civic rights and natural rights and all those things, for a whole semester, for a whole year, I'm sure. And that's not the topic I want to get into. It's interesting to me, of course. I want to talk about how this feels to us. How this lands when I say you don't have any rights to anything at all. That's what I want to get to. But before that, just a quick, historical walk. John Locke is probably most famous, and many of you are more educated than I am, 17th century, who talked about natural rights, and that included perfect equality, freedom, and the right to preserve life and property. Fast forward, and the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Inalienable really means they can't be given or taken away, and I can't give my own rights away. Resisting the political conversation here, it is notable that from day one, with the discussion of rights, there were carve-outs for certain segments of the body politic. That's risking taking this in a different direction. I've got all of the US Bill of Rights here, and it's a lovely document, and I really like it. And are those inalienable? If the US were to collapse, and that if is probably, I won't get into that, but we may be closer to that than we have been. Where do these rights go if the US collapses? How inalienable are they then? And then there's a really, really beautiful document. I won't even read a word of it. The UN Declaration of Human Rights. Just an amazing, passionate document. I like it better than our US Bill of Rights. And very detailed, very inspiring. There's 30 articles. And I think all of these are the right thing for us to do in our civic world. in our civic lives as we get organized, as we come out of the forest and say, okay, how are we going to protect ourselves and care for one another? Beautiful, beautiful documents, just stunning pieces of human history. But then our lives happen to us, and inalienability and natural rights, things like this, you have to look at those and question what happened, because we're not in control. When Joko said that about you don't have any rights, I was righteously indignant. Oh, it felt so good, but didn't do me any good. So all these expressions of our indignation when our rights are abridged. I've shut down universities and corporations and sat in the street and disrupted business as usual over rights, feeling all the while that I had a right to do that. They also had a right to put me in jail. You can't do this to me. I have rights. I'm an American citizen. And this kind of ties in with deserving. So we can talk about that too, if you like. I worked hard for this. I deserve it. I spent 30 years. I deserve this. Or, and we're hearing this a lot in public life today, as the indictments come down, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve this. And then most tragically, those 19 kids surely didn't deserve what happened to them. They had a right to a long and happy life. And that guy who did this deserves to spend, not in this case, but deserves to spend the rest of his life in jail. Does he deserve to spend the rest of his life in jail? So again, I said I wasn't going to do so much of a talk, but I want to kind of kick off discussion among us, and I hope everybody relaxes and leans in a little bit, but maybe with some questions. What are we to do when we experience not getting what we deserve and not enjoying our rights? Just within the realm of North Americans, many of us, perhaps a majority of us, experience this every day. Now, how do we feel about that? What do we do with those feelings? Is it right that we don't get what we deserve? And if we do find equanimity and we see that in the emptiness and silence that we just shared together, these rights are not fixed. They don't have a solid reality. Perhaps they're not inalienable. How then, at the same time, when we operate in the relative world, in the polis, the world of laws and city councils and insurrectionists and authoritarians, how do we fight for our rights without losing our single view of oneness? How do we hold and manifest both these perspectives and realities? So let's hopefully this stimulates somebody with a comment. Let's open it up for thoughts, discussion, questions. How does it feel? If we can keep it as close, I do have a vest on tonight, as close to the vest as possible, meaning keep it personal, keep it in your body if you can. But how does this all strike you? Are you indignant that perhaps you don't have any rights? Do you think Joko's wrong and you actually do? Linda, are you raising your hand or?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to it. I think rights only exist upon a mutual understanding and agreement. And, so they're not, I don't see them as, well, the whole idea of inalienable, is based upon a decision of a wording, but it's based upon a mutual agreement and a respect and decision that this is how we're going to organize ourselves and what's kind of, what's supportive of people and not supportive of people. I mean, and I think a lot of what's left out sometimes is rights and, the responsibility part. What responsibility do we have to each other? I don't think, the word deserving, I don't think we deserve anything, but I do think that there's a difference. There's no, like, I agree with her that there is no right, except that there are legal rights that have been agreed upon, but that doesn't mean that some power to be couldn't come in and take all those rights away. So there's no inherent right, I don't think. That's my feeling. But I think without some mutual understanding and respect of what right, how we treat people, and I think it's a moral value type of thing. I don't know how you exist as a society. So that's the kind of the way I look at it. And I was just reading an interesting book by this Native American botanist, and she was talking about, really how the indigenous people, looked at. So it was more of a kind of an agreement, even with it's not only human, but they saw all living beings or living things as having value. And, the way that you interacted with each other was based upon, mutual respect. And, the whole idea of, the earth and what you take and how much you take and, based upon and what you give. And, it's very interesting. She explained a lot of what nature gives to us if we deal with it correctly. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting to think about that. But so I think there is no inherent right, but I think without some kind of mutual agreement of how we're going to treat each other, then I don't know how we function as a society. So.
Thanks, Linda. And by the way, everyone meet my friend Linda from Rhode Island. She sits with our Zen Peacemakers group every morning and has done so loyally for the whole 2 years, I think, since COVID started. So many of us in Boulder County know somebody who lost their home in the Marshall Fire. Did they have a right for that not to happen? Seju, hi, and then Padma.
Well, I think I'm a little, I don't know, I'm a little confused, or maybe could use some clarity in terms of, are we talking about legal rights that are granted by the government or political rights, or are we talking about just the basic realization that life is unfair?
The latter.
And that's just the way it is. Life is unfair. And I had a boyfriend many, many years ago, thank God, who was constantly complaining. And, his favorite expression was like, why me? Like, why does this happen to me? If it was a red light or a stub toe or who, whatever. And I finally just said, well, why not you? And that actually shut him up for a few minutes. But anyway, so just looking for some understanding there, because I find like legal and political rights are just a whole realm. And as Linda was saying, it says agreements and negotiations, and they're very formalized, and you have certain rights in certain situations, but not in other situations. And that's not something you really have, you just have to put up with it. So I find that a very different category when we're
Yeah.
talking politics than when we're talking about personal experience of, why does this happen to me? I did not deserve this. I did nothing to deserve this. So anyway, I just wanted to get some
Yeah, thank you. And
clarity there.
I think you asked and answered your question. It is very much the latter. And definitely, we're not in any position to talk about, the political or legal side of this. Although, I brought it up because there's elements of that come over into me feeling like I deserve things, or like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are pretty ephemeral, aren't they? And those are, those are abridged all the time. And how do we feel when that happens? Padma, you had your hand up. I think you're muted, Padma.
Well, I hope I didn't go into too many different directions. I'll try to narrow it down. I think what Joko was saying is that if you say, I have a right to this, whatever that is, it's a fixed position and you're seeing something in a fixed way. When you say, why me? Oh, there's a good line that comes from Isaac Bashevis Singer. He was a Jewish writer, and someone once asked him, why does a Jew always answer a question with another question? And he said, why not?
That's beautiful.
But anyway, I sort of, okay, I'm going to venture into something I don't know anything about, which is koan study. Okay, so I've done a little, tiptoeing into that, but that hasn't been my practice. But what I'm understanding from the practice, and you can correct me, is, I do see the precepts as foundational. And when, as a yoga student, the precepts were the yamas and niyamas, very foundational. Then you do the other practices, and you do meditation as one of the many practices in your life. And then what happens? You bring that back into practicing the precepts, or the yamas and niyamas. So it's, in a way, it's a back and forth between something absolute and relative. And we bring the one, and we carry whatever, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but whatever experience or whatever on one level, we bring it into the other level. So we practice it, so, okay, so there's the absolute, and there we are in a human body and mind. And how does that absolute manifest in the human body and mind in my interaction with other people? And that's where we come up with these notions like the UN human rights. But that is a realm that we function in because we have bodies, minds, and we're interacting with other bodies and minds. At the same time, we do know that none of that is fixed, absolutely none of it. And on the big scale, we know that there are worlds on the macro and micro scale. Worlds are exploding and creating constantly. So we're part of that. And while we're trying to make sense of how we function in this body and mind, we also are aware that these things are happening and we're just, it's not why me, it just is. So I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense or going all over, but.
I think you stated that beautifully. Thank you very much. That's, that, and I've forgotten the terms you used, but those two elements coexisting harmoniously is Buddha, Dharma, Sangha.
Yeah.
I've mentioned this before, and I always think of, you've heard me maybe say this, but of a T-shirt that I have from the San Francisco Zen Center, and on the back it says, "The harmony of oneness and diversity,"
Mm-hmm.
and that really is the Sangha of Buddha and Dharma, just like you said, and that is dynamic rather than fixed. It's changing and insubstantial. Thanks, Padma. That was very nice.
Thank you.
Jodo, hi. Good to see you, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, for the fact that these rights seem to not exist at all, I sure get righteous. And for the fact that nobody deserves anything, I sure feel satisfied when people get what they deserve and whatever the other way around. But I also, just as I'm hearing your question, I look out the window and I'm looking at these clouds and there's a lot of light in the clouds. And I think, well, surely if there's anywhere where I have a right, it's to my experience, right? And then I'm looking at it and I don't, because there's not something permanent there. There's nothing to hold on to, and it couldn't, it's not going to exist in any way. Like, I don't have a right to be here. There's no right to even exist or experience or anything. It doesn't, there's no guarantee, so yeah, but I sure feel it. I feel like if you were to come at me with, come into my house and try to take my stuff, I'm not going to back down. And if you, try to take my life, I'm definitely going to defend it. So I'm not sure if that means that I do or don't believe in a right.
Is the believing in part extra?
Yeah, who needs that, right? Like, I guess I'll just defend myself if I need to.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Jodo. Very nice. Yeah. Gakyo, hi.
I'm not sure why, but as I'm kind of making room for this, the words right and expectation are kind of swimming back and forth in my mind, and it's occurring to me that having any kind of expectation is a form of entitlement, and that kind of points straight toward it being a form of aggression. And I'm not quite sure what any of that really means, but those words were kind of popcorning around when you were speaking of rights and expectations and entitlement and aggression all being in the same kettle.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. The entitled part of it resonates for sure, Gakyo. It's almost like somehow I'm special and life landing on other people in a bad way pick your example, whatever that might be, shouldn't, I deserve for that not to happen to me. I deserve for that not, and that's an entitlement for sure. It's just an idea. Um, um, yeah, Daniel.
Yep, thank you. What's coming to mind first, at least to point to personal experience, I'm kind of thinking as like a mathematician background, the rights that at least we build in a civic sense are intended to be almost axiomatic as like fundamental principles. Sometimes they ventured into a little more specific issues in terms of our civic rights beyond like, but your initial reference to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, I think that's a good one to pursue. But nonetheless, that comment towards like, especially like how indigenous people treat rights versus then say some of the perversions to it today towards like entitlement towards them or other sort of like even exclusivity towards who gets those rights, I think has been, bouncing on my head during this talk discussion. Because I think about like, say, especially in early America, the rights were like man to pursue life, liberty, and pursue happiness. Like women would often not really considered or labeled there in that document. Later on, that was changed, and we now consider both genders part of that. And maybe they'll now include a spectrum of genders soon. But nonetheless, beyond the human side of things, there's also say like rights of animals, rights of plants, rights of even geographic features. I like the recent movement that I've heard about in terms of like giving rights towards the Amazon River, and having that be having some amount of rights that are equal to people rights, and that it can then be a legal entity to be protected and served in a court in various ways. And I think in just saying all of that in terms of just like, we have these social constructs of rights, which invariably don't really exist anyway, because we're in this chaotic world that we can't really control anyway. But we choose to exclude them towards various different people, subsets of people, or not even include animals or not include certain things or whatever. And it's very arbitrary when it comes down to that. And I think in general, in terms of what would be more ideal rights, if it's something that we can actually achieve, would be something that is in fact axiomatic, and that it applies to everything. It's fundamental to everything, not just humans, not just it includes animals, includes plants, includes like the earth itself, includes space somewhere else. I don't know. It can include lots of things in terms of like that mutual respect, not just for other living beings, also for non-living beings. And I think being a part of that space, maybe rights is not the right word for it, but that's the concern there is just the process that we've gone through, at least over our civilization, of like including and excluding different people from those various rights, and hoping that even though they don't formally exist in a sense of the prompt here, they it's still important to at least find a way to have such beliefs and expectations towards all people, and not towards only a subset of people, things, or non-things. So that's what I have to say.
Daniel, that's wonderful. And my perspective on all this just kind of popped open another notch or two as you were talking, and something kind of surprising emerged. And that is that, endowed by our creator, perhaps we are the creator, and maybe instead of the word rights, as you were talking about grasses and bugs and ponderosa pines and pieces of granite and humans and stars. Going back to what Linda said too, I think also, maybe it's our, I don't want to use the word responsibility, but maybe it's responsibility, but maybe it's our calling to honor all creations with respect and protection to the best of our ability. And maybe that's how we can manifest perhaps rights, and that's not the right word, but manifest appreciation for everything, for everything. Maybe that's our work. Maybe that's our work. Thank you, Daniel. I like that. Oh, Sigmund, you're in the dark. I'm sorry. I see your hand now.
Hi there.
Hi.
Thanks. Boy, it's just been a real pleasure to listen and to what everyone's saying. So many riches there. I really, something Padma said just really just kind of opened up this dialogue for me. Because I got to be honest, when you were we're kind of summarizing Joko's statement, I honestly didn't know how to hear it. I didn't know what to think of it. I didn't know where she was coming from. So but what's interesting there, right there for myself was, oh, I don't know if I understand what she means. But what came up for me immediately was, oh, I have a responsibility. I'll use that word responsibility. I have a let me listen. Let me try to understand. I felt very strongly that sense of responsibility. Okay, Shoen is raising this point, and this comes from a respected teacher in our lineage, right? And so there's these, Shoen's saying this, Joko is claiming this, right? I don't know what it means. Let me listen to it so I can hear it. That was the first thing that came up. And then also I thought to myself, well, when I thought about rights, I kept thinking about responsibility. It's like more than rights, what came up mostly was just I have responsibilities. And I guess in that, to use Padma's terms, when I'm thinking about the absolute and the relative, in the worlds of the relative, I got a lot of responsibilities, and I can't talk about rights without those responsibilities, right? So, for example, if someone is going to make a claim, and I believe in that right of freedom of speech, right? I also then have to enter the social contract and say, well, okay, I'm going to listen to that. Let me listen, and I'm responsible because I'm a part of this social contract with other people. I want to acknowledge that person's dignity and hear what they have to say and listen to it, right? That came up pretty strongly for me. But then, when Padma mentioned the absolute, when she was talking about the absolute and the relative, it all opened up for me. I thought, wow, from the realm of the absolute, I totally get what Joko Beck is saying. Absolutely, no rights whatsoever. I mean, when we put on that set of eyeglasses, right? I mean, our tradition teaches us about shunyata, emptiness, right? All objects are empty, including our rights, our individual identities, all that kind of stuff, right? And then I slip off those absolute glasses and I slip on my relative glasses, and I think, oh, wait a second, no, hold on a second. And then what Jodo was saying made total sense, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm in my house. If someone comes into my house tonight and they knock on my door and they want to enter and I don't want them to enter, I'm going to protect my family. That person doesn't have a right to come in. But that's all in the world of the relative, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the question I have to ask is, well, what set of eyeglasses am I wearing at any moment? And then, boy, it's really interesting. Padma said this. I'm just repeating it, but how as Zen practitioners, right? How do we live from that non-dualistic experience of in which the absolute and the relative have joined together again. Anyway.
Very nice. Thank you, Yashin. Thank you. And this is rich. I appreciate everyone's comments. And as we go through this, again, it tends to expand. But then for me, it just comes back to not so much an answer to this dilemma or this question, but an approach to it, a how-to. And what I come back to is the three tenets. And maybe what Jo Quebec was pointing to was the three tenets. Not knowing. From this position of not knowing, there cannot be an idea that I deserve something, or that I'm entitled to have this or that happen or not happen in the next moment or next year. I'm entitled to not get cancer. From a position of not knowing, there's no space for that. And bearing witness is really receiving, like we say in our vows, numberless creations I vow to receive. For me, this is the bearing witness part. Everything that comes, let it come, let it go, let it be. Cynthia, hi. Nice to see you.
Hi. One aspect that I'm not sure anybody has really touched on tonight is when I read your newsletter and read what you were talking about, at first I thought, well, I feel like I have rights, but who or what would have given those to me? And so out of curiosity, I thought I would kind of look it up. And if I looked up sort of, do we have rights or that sort of thing, some of the things that you talked about came up, like the UN statement and the Bill of Rights. But most of the other stuff came from what I will call very religious people, in the sense of people who believe in a God who sits and makes decisions, a monotheistic kind of God. And they were coming from a point of view of God gives me these rights. So if we don't necessarily believe in that kind of God who is looking and judging and giving rights, then back to not being sure who or what would have given them to me. And the other aspect of that is, at least these people that were writing these things seemed to be people who lead with their religion, push it on other people, and would not necessarily seem to be respecting the rights of all people. So just another aspect that came to me.
Yeah. And surely another conversation path, isn't that? Yeah. A compelling one, to be sure. Sokyo, hi.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for your sharing. What comes up for me, especially after what was just shared, yours and Cindy's, is the sticking point seems to me to be in the I have. There's a lot of stickiness there. And when I remove that, that's the practice of not knowing, is that there isn't an I to have. Bring it all the way down into the felt sense of what we're talking about. And what is that? To me, like when Cindy, when you're talking about source, what is that source? Because there's a felt sense of rightness that I feel into, that to me is touching on that harmony of oneness and diversity. I can feel it, but as soon as I try to have it or grasp it, then it starts to become fixed. So anyway, that's one exercise I was doing and became really curious about that. And then in my curiosity, I also was curious about the word. And one very root definition of the word right is wise, natural, undisturbed, which reminded me of the Zen phrase of natural functioning, which touches into, for me, to the indigenous understanding of this is what happens when we are in our natural functioning, is we are kind, we don't kill, we, you know, all of the things that have become the rights that we can articulate come out of this natural functioning. In my experience, they're just what happens, and that is the taking action that comes out of not knowing and bearing witness without trying to grasp them. It's like, you know, you have a fish, don't hold it too tightly, but that's the feeling I was having of this this felt sense of rightness when things are functioning in harmony. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Sokyo. You know, and the again, back to Zen Peacemakers, which is an active practice. The challenge here is taking action, and if one is called in this direction, that action might involve fighting, not necessarily punch, but fighting for rights. You know, since 1965, voting rights for Black people are going backwards, and people need to fight for this, and that's very positional, perhaps, and very dual, actually. So that's really the challenge of this, is how to, you know, once we sort of settle into a comfort zone of, you know, I don't have any rights, there's nothing fixed, no one really has a right to any of this, and I feel free within that knowing, yet still I'll do all I can, if that's my calling, to fight for voting rights, let's say, or housing rights for a certain part of the population. We're just out of time. If anybody else has one last comment, I think we could probably take it, but then I want to have time to sit a bit before we conclude tonight. Seiju, yeah.
I was kind of thinking about what Gakyo said about entitlement and aggressiveness, and I think there's also a sense of grasping for control.
That's what all this is about, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, there's that kind of goes against this sort of Zen practice of dealing with what is.
Yeah.
Or facing what is, instead of arguing it with what should be and getting really, really mad because it's not what it should be, which of course has, you know, has nothing to do with fighting for political rights or so forth and so on. But I mean, on a level of course, it's not fair that, you know, Padma fell and hit her head, or that my sister's house burned down, or that, you know, completely undeserving people get sick every day, you know, just stuff that pops in my head. So, but it doesn't mean we can, you know, fighting it doesn't necessarily, you know, arguing with reality. That's kind of what I think of when Joko said that.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. And maybe we'll conclude by just acknowledging that however long ago it was, your boyfriend, I think, had the most wise expression of this notion, stubs his toe and says, "Why me?" It really comes down to that why me thing. So anyway, thank you all so much for this discussion.